Let's do it.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Topical Toxicology with myself, Theo, and Alexei.
Good morning, Theo. How the devil are you?
I'm exceptionally good. I've already been for my interval sprint runs in the park, and now we've just enjoyed one of the best croissants in West London in a beautiful little coffee shop called Cafe 11 in North Ealing.
I would say in Europe. From my personal experience, it's probably one of the best croissants I've ever had, apart from in Switzerland and in France. Genuinely. Really, really, really good. I've travelled half an hour for company and for croissant, in that order, before you say anything. Right, I was discussing the subject, or which subject we would talk about today, and the thing that I found, I wouldn't use the word alarming, but I thought that was quite striking, was the current Olympics, the Tokyo 220 Olympics, where one of the biggest Olympians in the US team, called Simone, is it Biles, I'm not sure how to pronounce the name, four-time gold medal winning Olympian, is still there in Tokyo, but has decided to withdraw because of mental health issues. Now, Michael Phelps, the biggest and probably the most decorated swimmer of all time, has actually come out and said, I'm really, a tear was in his eye, and he said, I'm really, really saddened to hear this, but it seems to me that is what everybody's talking about for the last 18 months. Now we know what's been happening the last 18 months. So I think this is just the tip of the iceberg, and for it now to be on mainstream media, and the Tokyo Olympics is where we're now hearing about it. It says everything.
Think about it for a second. These people are they are the 0.001% of toughness, of mental and physical toughness and durability. They are elite, and they are dropping like flies. And remember what we said last week, that the CDC, the Center of Disease Control in America, have stated that the two worst groups for prognosis, once hospitalized with corona, are fat people and anxious people. And what does lockdown do? Lockdown makes people fat and anxious. So why are people getting anxious? So let's see, anxiety is the endpoint of something. And what it is the endpoint of loss of control. And let's make no bones about this. Anxiety is far more serious than depression. In fact, anxiety is, if I see someone getting very anxious, I get more worried about their risk of suicide than someone who's clinically depressed. Although both carry a risk of suicide, anxiety is higher. Why? Because anxiety is about loss of control. And if you have loss of control, you have loss of hope.
Going back to your original point, which was a fantastic one about the Olympians being at the top of their game, and they are the most trained, the most mentally, as mentally strong as you can get, trained over many, many years. I've carried on reading this Reuters article, and actually it's I would have to read a couple of sentences because it's quite alarming. So it carries on to say, Phelps, the greatest swimmer in history and the winner of 23 Olympic gold medals, has publicly discussed his own battle with depression, including contemplating suicide. Then it goes on to talk about Biles, whatever, how to pronounce her name, the 24-year-old. So, top of her game, you would argue, at the peak of her mental and physical fitness, said the pressure of living up to expectations around her quest for a record gold medal had prompted her to drop out of the team competition after receiving a low mark in her opening vault. So we say in English, the straw that broke the camel's back. So that tells you how vulnerable and how, let's say, stressed she was, where one poor mark in one discipline out of the many she was actually entered in for has pushed her over the edge.
Now, you see, the thing is, you could say that is entirely coincidental and not relevant, but this is the first time that there have been so many incidents of this.
And you were talking about Andy Murray, weren't you, just before we started the podcast?
Andy Murray started off he made it fashionable, didn't he, to talk about mental health
And
he
have the
would
right
take his,
trainers and the right coaches.
he would take his psychologist with him.
And he was one of the first, actually, tennis players, the top 5 in the world to do that, top 10 in the world to do that.
But it's well known. It is well known that in elite sport, the psychology, someone's psychology, is equally important to their physical training, because you've got to be in a success mindset. And you know, I've had sports people come to me, and they need help, and so we work out what's wrong and then we address it, because there could be a multitude of things. But if you think of sports people as elite, but they're like racehorses, so they are incredibly tough. But if you change their environment just a little bit, they're going to lose control pretty quickly.
Can I try and dilute this down to the common man sitting in this coffee bar today and in many towns and cities across the UK and the world and Europe? If an elite athlete is feeling the effects of this, and they are trained, they are protected, they are cocooned by all these people, you know, they're even with COVID, they're in this bubble, so they don't see anybody else. They are constantly motivated, checked, monitored. They've got the diets, they've got the psychologist, they've got the personal trainer, they've got everything they need, and they are struggling. What's happening to the common man in the street now with, in the UK, the recent news that the furloughing system, the system which protects employees, pays most of their wages, is now being reduced over time, and there's topical news, that actually it's predicted that 20% of those people will not be coming back and actually will be made redundant. So in your opinion, tell me what you think is already happening and what will be happening, because I don't think we've seen the real wave of the repercussions of depression and stress.
We know that anxiety and depression has shot up, and suicide has gone up, and illicit drug use has gone up.
And suicidal rates have not been publicised, have they?
They haven't been publicised.
Isn't that funny?
Alcohol and drugs has shot up. Domestic abuse has shot up, and this is all about unhappiness and loss of control. And this is actually an exponential rise of something that's been happening for years. Let me take you back to something I mentioned before, that in the 1990s, the Royal College of Psychiatrists started the Defeat Depression campaign. And as a young, impressionable psychiatrist, I was all for it. I thought, right, okay, let's work out how to identify, let's work out how to educate, and we have something called psychoeducation, where you educate people on mental illness and symptoms and treatment and causes and so on. And when I became a boss and I started private practice, and I saw what was really going on, because you see in the NHS you don't necessarily see what's really going on, because you're treating the chronically ill, which is usually schizophrenic, or the chronic alcoholics. But in private practice, you're treating what's going on then and there in the general public, especially if they have insurance. And what you see is anxiety. And what I've noticed actually is that it's not clinical depression that's going up, and this is something incredibly important, because even the Lancet came out with an unbelievably stupid paper saying that psychiatrists should carry on prescribing antidepressants and should increase their prescribing because depression is such a problem. It's not depression. It's not clinical depression. It's unhappiness. For instance, 20 years ago, depression was the 5th commonest cause of illness and death. Now it's the commonest. We haven't suddenly become genetically vulnerable. We haven't changed so fast. Even if it's epigenetics that you think of, we have become unhappy. And my theory as to what's made us unhappy is the increasing pace of modern life coupled with social media. And the danger that people don't understand, in fact I am staggered how ignorant and quite frankly stupid government and policymakers are, because what we're seeing now in Corona is what we've seen for years in the normal commercial media, aka newspapers. Now, the thing is, and we can change that even to crowd mentality. Before newspapers ever existed, there's always a crowd mentality. Now, does a crowd mentality ever cause anything good? And the answer is very, very rarely. For instance, you might get a group of people rallying to lift a car off an injured mother, but usually it's mob lynching or riots. That's a crowd mentality. Now focus on media. Now the media will only sell what people want to hear, and people never want to hear anything good. They want to hear bad things. So the media self-select, although in a self-serving manner, for bad, exaggerated news.
What the media are doing is self-serving. They are creating the narrative which people are going on with. We used to call it gossip, where the media will start something which then...
Yeah, but if the crowd cared more about good news, then the media would simply produce good news.
Now we're talking about how the media operate. What I'm saying is the media are not a representation of society. They are just unfortunately...
Yeah, but unfortunately they're a representation of what interests society. That's the point.
Yes, but if you go out there and interview, you go in the street, a la campaigning as a politician, let's say, and you're going as a councillor on the streets, asking people, having genuine conversations in town halls, in coffee shops, and you're having a normal conversation as we're having now, you will find that most people, the majority, are quite level-headed, quite sensible. What's important to them is the roof over their heads, is seeing their close family. Look at what's happened
Not with gossip. You see, the trouble with gossip. What is gossip? Again, it's something that's emotionally stimulating, and it's always the shock factor. Oh, did you hear her? It's not. Oh, he's such a good boy. He got his A star. Yeah, but it's. Yes, oh, but he failed. Yes. Oh, he got expelled.
Yes, but people always like to look over the fence and point a finger and say, "Look what he's doing." But actually, when you look at really, when it comes to the crux of the matter, what's really important, people, especially with the COVID restrictions, have found out, or let's say realised in the main, that seeing their closest, their nearest and dearest, whether it's in care homes or whether the grandparents want to see their grandchildren, couldn't. That's actually what is important.
Yeah, but you see, that will change again, because they only find that in therapy. For instance, if I explain to people who are depressed and anxious and out of control, and I say, okay, look, there are two axes. One is pleasure, the tang to the palate, and that's your dopamine hit. And that's one of the dangers of social media, because it's all how does social media make money? They make money by keeping you interested. So they give you little dopamine hits of stuff that you like, whether it's posts, whether it's ads that you like. That's why they want targeted advertising, which is why I always switch off any kind of analytical cookies. Now, that's your dopamine. And if I ask people, what's important to your life? Do you want happiness? What, pleasure? Peace of mind? And they go, well, pleasure, obviously. I say, well, think about that for a second. Do you really, really want pleasure, or do you ultimately want a calm
peace of mind, isn't it?
And they go, actually, I want peace of mind.
So you're saying, in your experience, we talked about this offline last week, and actually we should have recorded that, which we are now. I think I even asked you twice I just couldn't believe what I was hearing, that most people of different levels of intelligence, levels of wisdom, different ages, didn't quite realise, let's say, in our humble opinion, what was really important, or what was really fundamental.
Which is why humans need leadership, and that's what religion does. See, this is the key thing. And the catastrophe of materialism, which destroys structure because people are inward looking, and so you get materialism, and it atomizes culture, religion, ethics.
Can I use an example there? I follow, in the UK, Chris Evans has been the sort of top UK DJ, TV presenter for the last 30 years. He's now back on Virgin Radio, in the breakfast slot, very successful, getting better all the time. And he, not every single show, but he makes a point of, I think it's now the last 2-3 years, he literally let go of his phone completely. He does not have a mobile phone. And the reason he did that was because it was getting too much. He was so self-aware that he knew that if he didn't do that, then he would get out of control.
That's very interesting.
So he literally gave, his wife who has a mobile phone or takes certain calls from certain people, maybe, but he will not be able. So he goes to work, and his PAs, his producer, he'll say, "Did you know that you need to be over there? You need to be over here, or whatever." But if not, he doesn't have a mobile phone. He said, "The day I did that, it was the start of the best day of my life. It's the best life I've ever had and ever led. I'm completely in the moment. I'm with my kids. I'm completely with people. I feel liberated. I feel free, and I don't feel a slave to. I'm not a slave to social media, where I'm listening." He says very eloquently, "I do not think that listening to a small, loud, vocal minority of people, whether that be on Twitter or Instagram, wherever it may be, is a true representation of life and something that I should be taking any attention to."
If you ever saw the film Silence of the Lambs,
Yes, I have.
with Anthony Hopkins,
I have, yes, sir.
and
Yes, I have.
one of the things one of the ways that they caught the killer was because Anthony Hopkins tells the detective, he says, "You covet what you see. You covet what you see." Translate, you want what you see. Humans want what they see. So if you have on social media all of this stuff where you have Kim Kardashian's ass and you have everyone trying to take the best possible selfie of themselves, and you have people showing their watches, their cars, their whatever, then suddenly the masses want that because they're seeing it, and they forget everything else. That's what they value, believe it or not. They don't value anymore a personal relationship because everything's artificial. They want that artificiality, and then
Is that what you're seeing when you are coaching people, when you have treated people over the years? Is that what you're seeing? Does that translate into what you see?
100%. So the thing about social media is, one, you're constantly getting dopamine hits, and the other thing to bear in mind is that the more dopamine you seek, the lower your serotonin, which is your peace of mind. So actually the pursuit of pleasure makes you unhappy, and that's what social media does. One of it. Now the other thing that social media does is it causes a global narrative, and just like a mob lynching, what causes narrative is always shock value things, and it's the negative things, and therefore that's part of the drive of this politically correct nonsense comes through social media, because you look for a shock factor. Gay rights, or LGBT rights, or just normal sexism, or men are being paid more than women, and that's awful. Now, in fact, just to say, it's been shown that actually women don't ask to be paid. If they ask, they actually get paid more than men. That is a research fact. Now, what social media has done is it's caused a global, viral, toxic narrative, and the latest manifestation is coronavirus. And the trouble is that anybody who doesn't fit into that global narrative is sanctioned, because via mirror neurons, anybody that doesn't fit in is rejected. And that's why I say racism is a natural phenomenon. The fact it exists is natural, but the fact it happens is a sign of mismanagement of society. In other words, it's a sign that a particular society doesn't have a all-encompassing identity. If you put two cultural groups in close juxtaposition, there will be trouble, because you're then putting two identities together in a foreign country where it has a different identity, so there's no sense of belonging. And mirror neurons show that if a coloured person walks in front of a white person, that white person's mirror neurons either don't respond as strongly as seeing a white person, or they don't respond at all. Therefore, it's a physiological, biological phenomenon. We don't like something that's different. Based on caveman times, because if you weren't familiar with something, it may eat you. If you're familiar with something, it means you saw it before and it didn't eat you, so it's good. So we like what we're familiar with, we dislike and reject what we're not familiar with. And as I say, corona nonsense is the latest politically correct, toxic, viral social media creation, the latest monster, which is given birth to by the love of shock value in our minds,
and with
a lack of leadership and identity.
And the UK government is so politically correct, as you've just eloquently said, that SAGE, the committee that are the scientists that are advising government, have decided again to come out with an alarming statement. They've just had a recent meeting, and they've come out and said there could be another variant, and this could take over all the variants. This could even actually be stronger than the vaccine. We're going to have to keep on vaccinating people, especially the elderly, keep on giving them boosters, and so on and so on, because we could be overtaken by this, and this could be another equivalent of SARS or...
Complete nonsense.
And it's amazing that they are still given the airtime. We've got so many
because they fit into the public narrative.
And there have been so many examples of Ferguson and others that have created these models that were so far out, so completely and utterly
because
wrong.
They fit into the toxic. You see, people don't understand the importance of what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Or you just go back to the simplest example of toxic narrative called a mob lynching or a riot. You then look at commercial media.
So you're saying it's in effect self perpetuating, because it's a bit like adding fuel to the fire.
Yes,
It starts off. It doesn't start off at a considerable size. It starts off quite small.
It's like one of those. It's like one of those Marvel beasts who feed on themselves. And that's why, as I keep on saying, I would rather there was a conspiracy theory, because here there is no off button until we reach global destruction. Because if you think about it, and I should give notice that I'm looking to get to formally sue using free legal advice that is available. That the fact is that the WHO changed their criteria and recommendations for PCR tests. They've said that you shouldn't now do 34 amplification cycles, because that actually detects one molecule, which is completely pointless. And in fact, at 34 cycles, there is a 97% false positive risk. They've said we need to do 25 cycles, and at 25 cycles, there will be no more pandemic. The reason why the vaccines are being given is under emergency law for a pandemic, under a temporary 1-year license. In other words, giving a vaccine now is illegal, because when the trials are finishing officially in the vaccines?
No.
Moderna, October 2022, Pfizer, May 2023. Secondly, when the vaccine started being given, there was already treatment that works. Ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine, fluvoxamine, budenoside. These are all treatments that work, and in fact there are plenty of doctors who say that there is no reason why anyone should die from coronavirus if they're treated early. If you treat someone early enough, you can treat them at home for 3 or 4 days. If they're a bit older, maybe up to a week. If they're a bit older still, maybe up to 2 weeks. Hardly anyone needs to die. So far there's been 10,000 deaths in America from the vaccines. And typically in elderly, the bigger catastrophe is in the younger, because they get longer term problems with the vaccines.
If we talk about the NHS in the UK, I noticed a very interesting sort of detail that I thought is very much the...
Can I just say that because it's illegal, vaccines are, death from a vaccine is civil court, criminal court, negligent homicide.
I will finish my sentence,
yes,
if you don't mind, because when you're off it's hard to I feel like Andy's in the room now, and I'll lose my train of thought. And funny enough, that's what Andy does as well. The new chief executive of the NHS has just been promoted. I beg your pardon, I don't remember her name. She was the deputy and she's now going to be taking charge and has been deputy for 10 years. Now, what I find interesting with what I call the one-dimensional narrative that is being given out there without any context, there's no context for anything, it's just scaremongering. What I find very interesting, if you've got half a brain, you will listen to the comments of what's going on with the restrictions, COVID. And COVID is used, sorry to say, I'm not knocking anybody who's had it or who's suffered from it. It's not a laughing matter. However, it's been used as an excuse to carry on the restrictions, the control, emergency powers. So it's a hold on, wait, hold the horses. So what I find quite interesting is she is now being, there is a statement in the media, she's now, an announcement, she's now being promoted as the chief executive of the NHS. I know, and Theo, you probably know a million times more than me, the NHS has been undermanaged, badly managed, underfunded, has been broken up, has been disconnected for many years. I used the example many podcasts ago that Hewlett-Packard were trying to unite all the back-of-house systems in the NHS. This was going back now, I think 7-8 years,
and
not 2
failed
years ago.
Miserably.
3 weeks before the launch, they pulled out and said, we're not. Basically, they were not getting the cooperation. They were close, but they weren't close enough. A £2 billion write-off. So that just gives you an example. This is going back 6, 7, 8 years ago. Now, what we don't have is context. We don't have any context of how the NHS is run, how outdated it is, how there are certain people that are running it that shouldn't even be, managing paperclips, let alone managing a hospital.
Unfortunately.
And yet, the coronavirus, in my humble opinion, is used as an excuse to say, well, hang on a minute, we've got to be careful. We're letting you know now already you're going to have to wait longer for your operation because of coronavirus. In fact, you don't even start a sentence. The coronavirus is shoved in that sentence just to cover their backsides. Whereas what they're not telling you is, well, I'm sorry, we've underfunded it, we have not managed it properly, we haven't made it fit for purpose and future-proofed it at all. We've just carried on throwing money at it, hoping that some of it sticks.
You know what they say, protect the NHS. If you think about it for 1 second, the NHS is meant to be protecting us, not the other way around. Secondly, ITU beds are running at least half. Okay, we have half the ITU beds of Germany or France because they've been underfunded. You see, if you look at if you take an engineering solution finding approach, after the first wave, the first thing that anyone with any brain should have done is increase the number of ITU beds. Now you may say, but it takes years to train. No, it doesn't. Absolute drivel. You give a qualified nurse or a junior doctor a free 3-month crash specialist course with a diploma at the end of it, and you'll see how well these guys do.
Now you're opening another wound that hasn't quite healed with me over these last 12 months. When they open up these Nightingale hospitals, anybody, now I'm talking, if we take a great example of what is possible, because we can moan or be perceived as being moaners and saying we're moaning about this and we're having getting it off our chest, a little speaker's corners moment, we're just getting it off our chest. No, or venting. No, we're not. Whatever you think of the UK government delegated the vaccination program to the military. There is actually a very senior officer of the military officer who is still in charge of the vaccination program. It wasn't Matt Hancock, it wasn't anybody else from the government. Now, meaning it's possible. Yeah?
It's possible to what?
To actually run something efficiently or run something with
we know that.
So now let's go back to the Nightingale hospitals. What was quite funny is we know, because facts now have proven it, that it was a publicity stunt. Yeah, it was a whole publicity stunt. They used the private sector to fill these Earl's Court, it was an exhibition centre, to fill these places with beds and equipment, whatever, in a record amount of time. I think it was 10 days, 2 weeks, they were all ready to go. And suddenly they realised that because there wasn't a certain level of equipment in those hospitals, either special ventilators, whatever, they couldn't actually use them for severe COVID or
Actually, I'll tell you what really happened. Because I was talking to someone high up in the Imperial College back office, and the real fact is that they insisted that if you wanted to send a COVID patient to one of these Nightingale hospitals, you had to send 2 members of staff with them.
Right.
because they didn't have the staff. So no health authority could afford to send anyone to these
So
places.
it shows you what a balls up it was. But my point was, if you turn that on its head, now I'm not saying it's as easy as this, I'm just using logic, and then you can come back to me and say, no, actually, there's a lot more to it than that, doesn't make sense. But surely there are certain types of illnesses or certain types of patients that could have used those hospitals, not coronavirus patients, other patients that need to still be kept in hospital for monitoring or may have something.
Maybe so.
And they could have been used for, let's say, other diseases, other illnesses, while the expertise and the hospitals that do have the equipment and do have the specialist doctors and surgeons and whatever will then be treating the emergency COVID cases.
Anything you can think of.
So
Cancer,
why
heart
were
attack.
they set up in the first place? The point is, if they were really there to be used, why haven't they been used?
Yeah, but the same all over the world. In America, they even bought a military ship and moored it outside New York, and that wasn't used either. I think it had a few beds filled, and that was it. It's all because the thing is, first of all, there's the modelling. See, I was talking to a group of people yesterday, and they said, yes, but look at all the disparity in terms of research results. Nonsense. What you have is clinical trials versus modelling. That's the only thing. So the models are all in favour of all this nonsense, because typically you'll have a publication bias. You see, this is the danger of any form of media. If you look at the serious journals, for instance, if you look at Lancet and Nature and things like that, there's a few years ago there was a TED talk on publication bias. Even these papers will look for something shocking. So, for instance, he talked about an antidepressant called Edromax or Reboxetine, and what it found was that there were 14 papers published that showed it works amazingly well, and one paper that shows it doesn't work. But then there were another 14 papers that were turned down that showed it didn't work, because it's not interesting to publish a paper that shows a new medication doesn't work.
Right. Should we try and do a full circle and go back to the beginning? I think we digressed. I think correctly, but I think if we go back to the reason,
Anxiety
and stress.
So how do people
how people can cope or have been
Well, they
coping
can't.
with
They haven't.
with the last 18 months?
They haven't. It's been a massacre. It's been a massacre. Even a good
But
friend
that
of mine
has
who's a
not
GP.
really been publicised. That hasn't. Why? I mean, I know why, but I'm being silly.
Because
why has that not been a
Because
headline?
there will be a reason for it, and the reason will
don't
start. And then people say, "Well, hang on." Then the cost benefit.
The penny
is
drops.
not working anymore.
The penny drops.
Correct. I mean, how can, and not only that, but then things go downhill very quickly because people forget what they're doing a job for. So, for instance, if you look at doctors and nurses, they have been brainwashed about COVID so much that the first thing they think about is protecting themselves. So they don't want to see patients. They don't care about patients, or they've been made not to care. If you go, and I've been to hospital a couple of times recently, and indeed our venerated Andy went to hospital because a close relative of his broke their leg, and at no point was he made to feel that they cared in the slightest. In fact, he was made to feel as if he was an inconvenience. And in fact, there was someone else he saw there who'd also gone in to lodge an official complaint about how she was treated. Now, one of the problems with lockdown is it changes your entire structure. And remember we said that we need structure and hierarchy in leadership. And structure reduces anxiety. If you remove structure or change it, your anxiety will go up.
But isn't it also the case that having a sense of purpose and being validated by either your colleagues or your boss is also a key part, and that gets back to the word identity, because that's a key part of also having control over what you're doing and having the routine in place as well. And if you're staying at home, in the main, we're now being told, well, you don't have to go to work yet, but soon we're going to ask you. But for the moment, you can still carry on working from home.
But talking about sense of purpose and validation, what the danger? See, one of the cancerous, acidic effects of political correctness is validation and sense of purpose is given to the most mediocre members of society, because those people virtue signal. They suddenly have justification to exist. And not only that, but exert authority. I've had my vaccine. You're bad. You can't come close to me. You can't even come into the same place that I can go to. You can't travel. And it doesn't matter that you've been too busy working and that you've had your entire career taken away from you.
The second or third most important cabinet minister, the Rishi Sunak, the Chancellor of the Exchequer in the UK, he has now purposely leaked a letter to the Prime Minister saying, excuse me, but these travel restrictions have to stop. They are damaging our country in general, not purely for economic reasons, but generally this is going to be damaging our country, and we've already damaged it and lost a fortune in tourism and in business, but it's damaging our businesses that now are getting less orders, that are not.
And also traffic lights. What is the point of having a traffic light and then you know that when you go on holiday things can be changed and suddenly you're forced to pay to stay in a quarantine hotel? That is grotesque in every possible way you can imagine.
It is disgusting because if you take that in isolation, take the to explain to people who maybe they're not quite sure. I unfortunately, for my sins, I understand these regulations, restrictions quite well. The red in the traffic light system means that any country on that list, if you go abroad to that country, it could be India as an example, or South Africa, you have to come back and go to a designated hotel. Now, I've seen one of these hotels,
even
by the way.
if you're double jabbed.
You still have to go to that hotel.
Oh, so what's the point of getting a vaccine?
Hold on. So you still have to go to the hotel for 10 days, yeah? Because that has not, the red...
At your cost?
The red has not been given that
at your cost, isn't it?
At your cost, and about £1,700. Because
you know, in other countries of Europe, it's not at your cost. If they pop you in a hotel, they pay for it.
That has got to be, even if it's morally for sure, has got to be illegal.
It is, of course it is.
To force somebody to be incarcerated in a building where I've actually mistakenly been to one of these buildings where I was actually going to go to a PCR station in a hotel in Heathrow, and I couldn't find it first time round, and I went to this hotel which I thought was the right place, and these two, I'm going to be very polite about this, these two bulldogs came out of there they didn't even have necks, they were security guards. I said, excuse me, what are you doing here? You know, not rude but quite menacing, and I said, well, I'm
enjoying their scintilla of
and
authority.
they said, you need to get off this property because this is a quarantine hotel. Ooh. And just hearing the two words together, quarantine hotel. So you have a hotel that's meant to be hospitable, where you would normally stay for business or for tourism, it's now become a prison.
AKA prison. You took the words out of my mouth, didn't you? And prison is usually for criminals, isn't it? For someone who is on remand or convicted.
You're paying for the privilege.
At Her Majesty's service, but it's not really, is it? It's not at Her Majesty's.
And if you can get your time slot correctly with this, if you can book in your time slot with the security guard, they will accompany you out of the hotel for a short walk so you can get some fresh air, and then they accompany you back to your room.
Socially distant, no doubt.
Of course.
Now let's make sure that people know that the chance of household transmission of coronavirus is currently running at 10 to 15%, and that kids, there is no single child that has been proven to transmit coronavirus to their family. Imagine that. And do you know why coronavirus cases are suddenly dropping?
No.
Because the schools are broken up, so now the parents aren't repeatedly testing their kids, are they?
It's a bit of an illusion, because it's down to the amount of testing that you actually carrying out, and there's a lot of pop-up testing that the government has purposely gone to certain hotspots and literally thrown a few of these mobile vans that have what I call the wooden sticks, or the little sticks, and go, right, you come here, up your nostril, down your tonsils, off you go, next please.
It's all meaningless, because first of all, there's an enormous false positive rate. As the WHO said, at 34 cycles, you have a 97% false positive right? And lateral flow is even worse than that because that's based on the PCR. And as we said last week, on the government website, 250,000 PCR cases backed up by 2,800 antibody positive cases.
I don't want to spread doom and gloom, because I think overall, considering people are actually still surviving and still, I wouldn't say prospering, some people are, but still coping with this quite well, considering all the things that have been thrown up against.
Pareto principle.
Okay, Pareto principle, the 80-20 or 90-10.
Emile de Zola.
Oh, okay. But having said that, I speak to a lot of people amongst my travels in business. I meet lots of people, and you'll find that the ones with a strong sense of identity and belonging. So, for example, I'm going to say it as it is. I meet lots of wonderful people from India, from Sri Lanka, very reputable, wonderful people, businessmen that have a very strong sense of community, very, very strong sense of community. They seem to be happier and surviving better than others. Now, the others is what I'm talking about. The others is quite a few million people in the UK that at the moment I don't think the penny has fully dropped yet. Meaning there is this not subconscious, but there is this the level of anxiety and depression has been slowly chipping away for the last 15-16 months, and I don't think it's come to the fore quite yet. And that will probably happen if that person, for example, is one of the 20% predicted of people losing their jobs, made redundant because of the furlough scheme ending. So I don't think we've quite got the real litmus test of what's going on at the moment. Now, when that domino starts to go, then are we in the UK, amongst other countries, ready to cope with the amount of...
well, that's why they're saying...
I don't think we are. We're not ready. We don't have the resources.
That's why we're getting another recession coming. Even though stock markets are at historical highs, they're all set to drop. They've all got the danger signals. Bond yields have started going up. And that's one of the first signs. That's the smart money way of saying we believe there's going to be a recession.
So if we do a roundup of where we are, I want to be careful about saying it's just the...
Okay, can we just talk about very briefly?
Yep.
Vaccines for children. You see, and
very
that,
contentious.
That's
very
going
contentious.
To be a flashpoint, because I educated the headmaster of my son's school. I sent him a couple of research papers, and he was shocked. So he's just been keeping his head down and listening to the normal toxic government narrative and the public narrative. He was unaware. He actually came to me afterwards and he said, "Thank you very much for what you sent to me." Now, the other thing that people do not know is that because the people keep on saying vaccines are a proven public health benefit. I used to think that. In fact, I used to think that as a highly trained medical professional until recently, until I looked at the data. And if you look at all diseases for which we have vaccines currently, and you look at the graph of those diseases, they were all falling precipitously before vaccines were introduced. And actually, the polio vaccine worsened things. They found that giving people the polio vaccine made them iller. Think about that for a second. The other thing is that BCG, again, BCG it's the law. You have to have the BCG vaccine. Google it. Look at the research papers. It doesn't work.
I think we have to be careful. We're reaching the end of the podcast. I think we have to be careful to where we're leaving this thread here.
So the point is that vaccines, no vaccine in history apart from smallpox, and even that's questionable, have worked. And they are fully researched. Now we're looking at a vaccine which is currently illegal because there's no longer a pandemic officially according to the WHO, and there are other more effective treatments. That's not going to suddenly break the mold of history, is it?
So you're saying that the UK government are using the vaccination program as a psychological tool to cover their asses?
Yes.
And basically convincing people that this is the answer to everything?
Yes. because they want to take the credit and avoid responsibility. That's what democratic government is all about.
Well, we know that a few weeks ago, and this has been publicized in the media, this is not just me, it's not just my opinion, that actually there's been a few senior government ministers that have actually met with Boris Johnson, and I think especially coming from him, have said what levels of death are acceptable. Just the thought that has been minuted in a cabinet meeting. But then now, I wouldn't say realising, I'm being
Levels
careful.
of death about what? About from corona?
From corona are acceptable. Sorry, thank you. So you can look at that from two different sides. One side is maybe, let's be sort of benevolent and understanding and empathetic. Maybe even finally government ministers are realising that we have to live with this. That life carries on.
You see, there's two, that we'll finish off with this.
Yeah.
There's 3 cycles we've seen so far then. The first part of the cycle is when corona started. The government simply automatically went into the 40 years of WHO research and recommendations, i.e. herd immunity. Then you got the social media toxic global narrative
Lockdown.
that frightened everyone, because governments are not independent, they are prostitutes to social public opinion.
Causing
lockdown. And now you're getting increasing numbers of ministers, probably because they're being personally affected, let's be brutally honest, saying, actually, maybe this is a load of rubbish.
When you've got government ministers at that level who are basically funded by or exist by budgets, by stats, by look how well my department is doing. Rishi Sunak being an example. And he is going to, let's call it a cabinet business meeting and say, yeah, I really do apologise, but at the moment I'm 30 billion, I'm 40 billion down in revenue. And somebody said, why? Well, you know why. Until we open up the economy properly, I'm not going to get this money back. And in fact, forget the 256 billion that we've already put into this because of the virus, because of the restrictions, because of the lack of businesses being able to operate. Forget that money. I'm not going to get that back.
How are we going to wrap up? How are we going to wrap this all up and actually admit to the public that it's all been a terrible mistake?
Well, we know that's never going to happen.
Too big to fail, isn't it?
That's never going to happen. So I think from my point of view is mental health, only because of the recent Olympics as an example, has now finally been put there as a headline that would never have happened with government communicating to the media, because it just wouldn't happen.
But you know what's going to happen?
The admission of failure.
Unless it's managed properly, mental health will just become another toxic global narrative of virtue signalling. Oh, you can't touch me because of my mental health.
Or you can stay at home because if coming to work will affect your mental health.
That's it. So you see, that's the trouble. Without central identity and leadership, you just get political correct nonsense.
Well, on that note, thank you very much. Thank you for listening.
Thank you for listening.
Bye-bye.
Have a good week. Bye-bye.